We're going to start the... Sí, y bienvenidos a todos. Tengo que empezar con grabar, recording. Bueno, entonces, vamos a empezar con un video bastante corto de la historia del español en México. Tiene cosas interesantes, especialmente cuando están hablando de voz. ¿Dónde se usa voz? Y entonces, cuando ustedes ven la mapa, van a entender por qué la cosa de voz es tan complicado. Todo es complicado con voz, porque es algo muy errático. Se usa en partes de un país, pero no en otras partes del mismo país. Es un asunto muy confuso. It's a really complicated subject. Vamos a empezar con esto. Now, I started in a little bit, few seconds into the video because they talk about, I think this is for people who do not know that Spain conquered Latin America. Okay, that's why they speak Spanish there. Creo que ustedes ya saben. So I'm trying to go through the obvious. They know this. They don't need to see this part. Okay, vamos a empezar con esto. Es de un lingüista. This is a linguist who makes this channel about many, many different languages. But he does talk quite a bit about Nahuatl. Y Nahuatl fue, o sí es, porque todavía existe, es el idioma anciano de los indígenas en México, ¿verdad? Ok, entonces.
Continued to be widely spoken for a long time, and even today around 1.7 million people still speak Nahuatl.
1 millón de personas que todavía hablan Nahuatl. Ay, okay.
As a result of language contact, Nahuatl had some influence on Mexican Spanish as it developed. It's far from being the only indigenous language of Mexico, but it had the most influence because of its presence in central Mexico and the colonial capital in Mexico City, previously known by its Nahuatl name Tenochtitlan. While indigenous languages continued to be spoken in Mexico, during the colonial period, Spanish became the prestige language, which increased its dominance and the decline of others. Today, 92.7% of the population speaks only Spanish. Features. Aside from having its own accent and intonation, and its own slang, which has a reputation for being relatively insane, Mexican Spanish is mostly the same as European Spanish, though there are a number of differences that are worth mentioning. A lot of those differences are true for other varieties of Latin American Spanish as well, but we're going to focus mainly on Mexican Spanish. Like most varieties of Latin American Spanish, Mexican Spanish features ceseo. That means that the letter Z and the letter C before I or E are pronounced S rather than th, as they are in the pronunciation that's considered standard in Spain. For example, the word for shoe. In Spain, it sounds like this.
Zapato.
And in Mexico, it sounds like this.
Zapato.
The verb meaning to do or make. In Spain.
Hacer.
And in Mexico.
Hacer.
The reason for this is that many of the Spanish settlers in Mexico, and in the New World in general, were from Andalusia, where ceseo was and still is a part of some people's speech.
And Andalusia has some very specific dialect differences from the rest of Spain. And they do, in Andalusia, you are likely to hear people drop a lot of Ds, la verdad, instead of verdad. And this ceseo of actually using what we use in Latin America, that ese sound, zapato instead of zapato, gracias instead of gracias, and no decimos gracias aquí en las Américas.
So essentially, a dialectal feature from southern Spain became the norm in Mexico and throughout most of Latin America.
So where these people came from and immigrating earlier on affected that movement away from the th into the ese sound of the ceseo.
Like most varieties of Spanish nowadays, Mexican Spanish exhibits yeísmo. This means that the Spanish phoneme represented by LL, y, has merged into the phoneme represented by the letter Y. So now Y and double L represent the same sound. That phoneme is usually rendered as a voiced palatal fricative, y,
A voiced palatal fricative. Doesn't that help? You know, fricative, there's friction in there.
which is similar to the English Y sound, y, but has a little more friction. So to me, it sometimes sounds like it's somewhere between y and j, y. Let's compare these two words, focusing on the phoneme in the middle of each word.
Vaya, vaya.
The sound in the middle of each word is the same. It's y. But in Mexico,
Yeah.
you will also hear that phoneme pronounced as an affricate, j, especially after a pause. Grammar. One obvious difference between...
So that little thing is why the beginning students get confused, because they hear gaye and they hear a little je with the y sound, and then they go, well, what's the right way to say that? Well, anything really between a y and that little tiny je, you know, is okay. But if you're in Buenos Aires, of course, it's, yeah, llave, they really zhuzh that up. But no place else do they zhuzh that up. Well, Uruguay, yeah, Uruguay, Paraguay, La Argentina, but other places, no, not so much. It's just a teeny tiniest little bit of that j sound.
Between European Spanish and Mexican Spanish, along with other Latin American varieties, is a difference in the second person plural pronouns. In Spain, there's a second person plural informal pronoun,
Vosotros.
which is used to address friends, family, children, and animals, and there's a second person plural formal pronoun,
Ustedes.
which is used to address other people. In Mexican Spanish, vosotros is not used. In both formal and informal situations, the pronoun is.
Ustedes.
It's worth pointing out that vosotros doesn't just replace ustedes, it also has its own conjugations. If you're learning Mexican Spanish, you can get away with not learning those. Well, at least until you visit Spain. For the second person singular in both countries, there's an informal pronoun
Tú.
and a formal pronoun.
Usted.
In some parts of southern Mexico, near the borders with Guatemala and Belize, vos is used instead of tú, or in addition to it. This is called voceo.
And here they show you this wild map of what happens with vos. And a lot of these are overlapping. Look at all those overlaps, you know, voceo in speech, plus the tuteo. And with tuteo, that means they use both tú and vos, both. Okay. And so you see a lot of that, but then there are all these things where it overlaps between it's used in speech, but maybe not in writing. And then down here, of course, Argentina, that where you would expect right down here is where they're full on with vos down there. They're full on with, you know, tenés instead of tú tienes, you know, it's just using vos. But it's a real mixed bag through a lot of these areas.
What do
And
they
some of
mean
these
by
countries,
what do they mean by vos is used instead of to?
instead of tú, in some countries, or sometimes, as you can see up here, in some regions of some countries, but not the whole country, they'll use only vos instead of tú. In other regions, they'll use both vos and tú, and vos is used for like maybe close male buddies, but tú for your wife or family, or and there are other areas where it kind of flip-flops. Who's okay to call vos? You know, sometimes people say, oh, vos, that's too intimate for that type of person. But
So-
you know, yeah, and it varies a lot. Even within Colombia, you hear vos, but it's a regional thing. Some areas don't bother with it and some do.
So you would use vos for this second person singular?
Some places
Would you
like, so
conjugate it differently than with the second person plural?
yes, but only in present tense. And I think some commands, I know it is very screwy. It's very hard to keep track of, and even Spanish speakers will tell you, you know, who've grown up with it. Yeah, you know, some parts of the country they use this and others they just don't. And if I ask, like, who do you use it with? They're kind of selective. Vos is for certain category of people, but tú is for other folks, like more family oriented. So vos uses a very slightly different conjugation, but it does not, but it only happens in present tense, oddly. So if you're down in Argentina and they say, do you have, it'll be tenés. I don't even use it myself. So that one's kind of a tough one for me. Instead of tienes, tenés. They don't use stem changes. Vos does not use stem changes. That I know for sure. So, I even have to go through and review, like, how do they use vos?
But if it was past tense, would it be tenía? But tu tenía?
In past, they apparently don't use a special form for vos, for the verb. So like if you're using perfecto, pretérito, they won't use a vos form. They'll just use the tu form, but they'll use vos as the pronoun with the tu verb in past. It is really strange. So it's not even consistent between tenses. It's consistent that a vos form exists for present tense. And after that, it's kind of all over the place. And who it's considered okay to use vos with differs from like one part of Colombia to another part of Colombia. And some of them, it's just, they just use it in speaking, but not in writing. And so it is really, it's very checkered. It's very checkered.
If you were speaking with a friend, you would say, "Tú tenés el libro."
Tenés, yeah.
A group of friends, you would say, "Vos tenés el libro." But if you're saying to a group of people, you would say, "Vos tenés el
Then it's ustedes. Then it's back to ustedes. Group of people, it's back to ustedes. Vos is just for one, singular.
Okay.
Yeah. But it is very, very complicated. I had checked out some videos about a year ago on, is there some enlightening thing about using vos? And even for native speakers, the ones who don't use vos a lot, it's like, this is confusing. Because, it's such a regional thing. And there are different theories, by the way. He's got one theory about how vos came to become popular in some areas, but I've heard very different theories that are not like what he says. Some of the vos theories, which I think I tend to believe more rather than just what he says, is that vos, when it came over from Spain, was actually kind of a predominant or very prevalent form of addressing people. But you're talking about the times of Shakespeare, that far back. And because it was popular in Spain there, and all these people were coming over from Spain, that it was brought over. And that to me seems a little more likely, I think, even than he attributes it to something else. So people don't even agree on how vos really came over, but you'll hear
The
it.
varieties of Spanish spoken in these areas have more.
No, dime.
I was going to say, so when you're in those areas, you err on the side of formal, usted.
Yeah, you're probably going to err on the side of usted anyway if you're a tourist down in Argentina.
But you're not going to be out of line then by doing that. Okay.
Yeah. So, it isn't really something you're going to need unless you were staying for a long time and you got to know people pretty, well enough.
Right.
Or, if you had like a consistent one certain person who was handling a tour, if you were in a group tour, then you might want to learn something with vos. But Argentina is the one place where both in speech and writing, you can see all the way through here, used a lot, pretty predominantly. Other places it's patchy. So, you probably want to err on the side of usted anyway, because that's just the polite form.
More in
as a
common with
tourist.
Central American Spanish. They are influenced by the Mayan
Central
languages that
American.
have historically been spoken in the area and are
Yeah, he attributes some of this to Mayan culture. I'm not sure I buy that theory, but he possibly knows more than I do about linguistics. So I shouldn't be too quick.
still spoken there today. expressing the past. There's a difference in how the preterite and present perfect tenses are used in Spain and in Mexico. In Mexico, the distinction is similar to in English, with the present perfect used for actions in the past up until the general present, and with the preterite, the simple past tense, used to talk about actions completed in the past at known or specified times. In Spain, on the other hand, the present perfect is usually used for all recently completed actions. For example, take this sentence meaning, I spoke to my mother this morning. In Spain, it's
He hablado con mi madre esta mañana.
and in Mexico, it's
Hablé con mi madre esta mañana.
This is kind of an important distinction. This one right here. That present perfect is used quite a lot more in Spain than it is in Mexico. And that isn't to say that it isn't used in Mexico. It's just that it has a more recent past feel in Mexico. Mexicans tend to use pretérito way, way, way more than the Spaniards do, because it's kind of a more blanket, to them, a simple past. So hablé will be much more commonly used versus he hablado. And he hablado, if you're in Spain, they're going to be thinking about how long ago was that? And then they decide which past tense to use. If it's pretty recent, they'll tend to err on the side of he hablado. In Mexico, that preterite kind of becomes more of a blanket thing. Pretérito is far, far, far more common. They use much less of present perfect. The exception might be in writing, formal writing, so newspaper, reading that sort of thing.
Notice that in Spain, the present perfect is used, even though this action took place at a specified time in the past. While in Mexican Spanish, that would result in one using the preterite tense, or the simple past. The preterite form, or the simple past, is actually used more in Mexico than in any other Spanish-speaking country. In European Spanish, to inquire about degree, like how big, for instance, people ask
¿Cómo de?
In Mexican Spanish, it's
¿Qué tan?
For example,
¿Qué tan grande es el terreno?
this means how big is the piece of land. In Spain, it would be
¿Cómo de grande es el terreno?
And this distinction applies to Latin American Spanish in general, not only Mexican Spanish. The negation word no is sometimes left out and understood from context in sentences with hasta,
This part is not that important, so I'm just going to roll through this.
which means
particular
until.
part.
This sentence means we won't get paid until next month. In Spain
No recibiremos el pago hasta el próximo mes.
and in Mexico.
Recibiremos el pago hasta el próximo mes.
Notice that the word no is not present in this sentence, but it's understood from context. This makes sense to me if I think of it in a slightly different way. Time will pass until next month, then we will get paid. Note that in Mexican Spanish, both ways are valid, with no or without no. Another thing to add is that in European Spanish, it would probably be more natural to say it this way.
No recibiremos el pago hasta el mes que viene.
Notice how next month is expressed. This could also be used in Mexico, but the way we heard it before is more common there. In Mexican Spanish, bien is sometimes used with the meaning of very. This
Muy típico. Esto es muy típico del español en México.
sentence means this computer is very expensive.
Esta computadora está bien cara.
This is different from the way the word is used in other Spanish varieties. Usually it's used to modify a verb with the meaning of well. In Spain, you'll likely hear this,
Este ordenador es muy caro.
with muy instead of bien. Also notice that the sentence in Mexican Spanish uses the verb estar, while the sentence in European Spanish uses ser. In Mexican Spanish, ser would be used to say that computers in general are expensive, but for a specific computer, estar is used. In European Spanish, ser is used because it describes the general state of the computer. If you used estar, it would imply that the price is currently expensive. In other words, the price has changed or is variable, but that would require more context.
But what's probably more important is that idea of bien. That is a really common thing with Mexican Spanish, using bien instead of muy in a lot of situations. It's just, it's a vocabulary thing. It's not really so much a grammar. Está bien cara.
Price is currently expensive. In other words,
Okay.
the price has changed or is variable, but that would require more context. Vocabulary. Mexican Spanish has some vocabulary that differs from European Spanish. The truth is that all Spanish-speaking countries have some of their own vocabulary. In Spain, the word meaning here is
Aquí.
and in Mexico it's
Acá.
in Spain, the word for car is
Coche.
in Mexico it's sometimes
Coche.
but it's sometimes
Carro.
This seems to depend on the region. Similarly, the common expressions for to drive a car are normally different. In Spain you say
Conducir un coche.
but in Mexico you might hear
Manejar un carro.
or
Manejar un coche.
in Spain the word for glasses is
Gafas.
and in Mexico it's
Lentes.
in Spain the word for pen is
I'm gonna lentes. Some places anteojos. Depende. Sometimes to some people, lentes is just the lens part of your glasses. So it's a pretty regional thing. Anteojos is also used in Mexico, so it depends a little bit. This thing of bolígrafo, outside of Spain, people do not use bolígrafo. Well, I'm going to take that back. I've heard Colombians use bolígrafo, but the other word,
Bolígrafo.
you know a
And
little
in
bit better.
Mexico, it's
La pluma.
Pluma.
and the word for juice. In Spain it's
Zumo.
and in Mexico it's
Jugo.
Yeah, thumo, and of course it's always pronounced thumo. They're the only ones who use thumo for juice. Jugo every place else.
word for potato. In Spain it's
Patata.
and in Mexico it's
Papa.
this word, papa, is used in most Spanish-speaking countries and comes from the Quechua language.
And so I used to think as a kid that papa was just a shortening of patata with putting the P in there as a repeated thing, but it really isn't. It really does come from Quechua because the potatoes originally came into the diet of the world through, well, tomatoes as well, through the indigenous peoples. So patata, they don't use papa in Spain at all. It's always patata, but you know, papa.
How did
In
it
most
enter
of Latin
Mexican
America.
Spanish from Quechua? Quechua is not spoken in Mexico. Well, potatoes originated in Peru, where Quechua is the most widely spoken indigenous language. In Spain, the word for computer is,
Ordenador.
which is borrowed from the French word ordinateur. In Mexico, it's,
Computadora.
this word comes from computar, to compute, plus the agent suffix dora, based on the English word computer.
So some of these differences will come into play from who are they closer to? In Spain, they're closer to the European continent where a particular term is common for things like technology words. But in Mexico, being closer to us, they're going to adapt things that are closer to what, you know, they
That
hear.
word
with-
is used in various Spanish-speaking
Americas.
countries. There are, however, more English words in Mexican Spanish than in any other variety of Spanish, particularly in northern Mexico, because of proximity to the United States. Here are a few examples. The word for hobby or pastime. In Spain it would be,
Pasatiempo.
but in Mexico you'll likely hear
Hobby.
the word for truck. In Spain it's,
Camión.
but in Mexico you might hear
Troca.
the word for watch. In Spain it's,
Ver.
in Mexico it's sometimes,
Guachar.
I have never heard watchar. I have never heard anybody use watchar. I don't know if any of you have. That one seems that seems more Spanglish than Mexican.
That was something I would come up with.
Yeah. Well, you know, another one, I used to have kids come up to me and say, sometimes, you know, our family, they say something, ¿Quieres un raite? Do you want to ride? ¿Quieres un raite? And then they go, that's Spanglish, isn't it? Oh, yeah. Ooh, raite, yeah, I don't know. But watchar, I've never even heard any of my kid friends ever say.
and that word is
Necesitamos
also
guacharlo.
Oh, perdón?
Necesitamos guacharlo.
Watcharlo. I think that one he got from a different kind of source. That watchar, I'm not so sure
in some
about.
contexts where the standard word
Troca,
would be
yes.
Mirar.
to look. And the word for mouse, as in a computer mouse, in Spain
Ratón.
and in Mexico.
Mouse.
Some words were borrowed from Nahuatl, which gives Mexican Spanish some of its unique flavor. Words from Nahuatl are mainly nouns representing everyday things, like animals, plants, fruits and vegetables, foods and drinks, and household goods. The word for grasshopper, in Spain,
Saltamontes.
but in Mexico it's,
Chapulín.
Sí, esto muy chapulín. Se comen chapulines. You know, chapulines are also eaten.
Mhm.
Especially around Dia de Muertos, you can see great big baskets of chapulines. So, you know, chapulín, I never heard saltamontes from a Mexican speaker ever.
I thought Chapultepec was grasshopper.
No, Chapultepec is a park in Mexico City.
I was
Chapultepec.
told a long time ago it was named after the word grasshopper.
Oh, maybe it was. Es posible. That might be possible. I had never even thought about that. Es posible. No sé, pero parece
The
razonable.
word for turkey in Spain
Pavo.
and in Mexico.
Guajolote.
In Nahuatl, many of these words have the absolutive suffix TL, which developed into the TE ending in Mexican Spanish. Words from the above categories with a TE suffix in Mexican Spanish are probably of Nahuatl origin. The word for owl,
Búho. Tecolote.
the word for vulture,
Buitre. Sopilote.
the word for kite.
Cometa. Papalote.
This comes from the Nahuatl word meaning butterfly, papalotl. And there are some words from Nahuatl that are used across the Spanish-speaking world, including in Europe, since they represent items found in Mexico. The word for raccoon,
Mapache.
the word for chewing gum,
Chicle.
and this is also the source of the name of the chewing gum brand Chiclets. Chicle also refers to the raw material, gum from the sapodilla tree, from which chewing gum was originally developed. It has been chewed by indigenous people of Mexico and Central America since long before the arrival of Europeans. The word for peanut in Mexico, as well as in Honduras, is
Cacahuate.
in Spain, a variant form of that word is used.
Cacahuete.
In most other areas, the most common word is maní. This word came from the Taino language and used to be spoken in the Caribbean. Peanuts were exclusively found in the New World, which is why these words were borrowed from indigenous languages. Some such words made their way into English too.
Aguacate.
The word for avocado,
Cacao.
which entered English as cocoa.
Chile.
The word for chili, or chili pepper. The word for tomato.
Tomate. Tomatillo. Jitomate.
The way these words are used differs depending on the area and country. In central Mexico, tomate is a green tomato, jitomate is a red tomato, and tomatillo is a small one. But in Yucatan,
So in all these variations of tomate are all these words that we see constantly in menus here in our region. So a lot of times, especially tomatillo, you know, you get that io thing at the end. It's little, yeah.
Yucatan, for instance, tomate is a red tomato and tomate verde is a green tomato. One last word of Nahuatl origin is chocolate. In Spanish,
Chocolate.
Mexican slang. Mexican Spanish is well known throughout the Spanish-speaking world for its colorful slang. One word you'll probably hear is
Güey.
meaning something like mate, bro, or dude. The word literally means ox and used to be used as an insult, but now it's used as a term of endearment. Well, at least in Mexico. One expression you'll probably hear is
¿Qué onda?
meaning what's up.
¿Qué onda, güey?
Nada,
Qué padre.
meaning that's great or how wonderful. Padre literally means father.
Chido.
This word means cool.
Tu sombrero está muy chido.
Your hat's really cool.
A huevo.
Hell yeah. This expression containing the word for egg is used in many different Spanish-speaking countries, but with various meanings. In Mexico in particular, it's used like this to show happiness or to celebrate something. And just like hell yeah in English, it can be used to emphatically show agreement.
La neta.
This means truth.
¿Neta?
For real? It can also be used to describe people in a good way.
Eres la neta.
You're the best.
Órale.
This word's used in many situations. It expresses amazement, enthusiasm, or agreement with what someone has said.
Aguas.
This means watch out or be careful.
Chela. Cheve.
These words both mean beer.
Pedo.
This word literally means fart, but it has many different uses and meanings, and sometimes it means drunk.
Está bien pedo.
This means he's really drunk.
Yeah, instead of muy pedo, bien pedo. Really sauced up.
And notice again that bien is used to mean really or very. Pedo is also used in,
¿Qué pedo?
which is like que onda.
So yeah, that que pedo is of course like extremely casual. You wouldn't use it in a business situation. Que pedo, what's up? You probably wouldn't even use que onda in a business situation. They're too casual. It would be like saying sup to somebody in English instead of what's up.
Madre.
This is the word for mother, but it has all sorts of slang uses, too many to get into here. For example,
Me valen madres.
this means I don't care, but it's quite emphatic, more like I don't give a shit.
Con madre.
This means something like awesome, but literally it means with mother.
Qué poca madre tienes.
This means you have no shame. Its literal translation is more like what little of a mother you have.
You got to be really careful with that word madre because it really sometimes just tu madre by itself. No, probably don't. But you know, me vale madres is pretty common. You know, just don't give a rip or don't give a blank. Yeah, that's super common amongst a lot of people. And I'm not sure it's really all considered all that vulgar, although it is, but a lot of people say it.
Mexican slang is well known for its crude words and expressions, which can be shocking to other Spanish speakers, and can be shocking to other Mexicans in the wrong context. Including those words here might get me in trouble, so I've actually cut this part of the video and put it into a separate secret video that you can find in the description down below.
Yeah. They've got the kind of bad one. That's not
Mexican
attached to
Spanish
it.
is fascinating because of its expressive nature and its unique flavor. In many ways, it's representative of the ways in which Latin American Spanish is different from European Spanish, but it's also special because of the influence of Nahuatl, and to a lesser degree, other indigenous languages. And as we saw towards the end of the video, Mexican Spanish makes an impression. The question of the day, to speakers of Mexican Spanish,
Okay.
what
Y
other...
eso no tiene nada. This part doesn't really have anything in it for us. No tiene nada para nosotros. Pero es interesante pensar un poquito en la influencia de la cultura indígena, de toda la influencia de los viejos inmigrantes en el año 1500, de todo. And if you want to look up the naughty stuff, you can go back to that video and it's in his little show more section. He has all the really like typical, really bad stuff. So, okay. No voy a mostrar ese video, pero es algo para entretenerte, something to entertain yourself. Si tienes interés, if you have interest, go check that out later. Ok, muy bien. Vamos a empezar con otras cosas ahora. Y vamos a hablar un poquito de los 2 episodios de la película del tiempo entre costuras. Y quiero empezar con, hay algo que ustedes no entendían, que era difícil entender. Había algo que, un evento, o un vocabulario o algo que no entendían, ¿o no? Hay subtítulos, entonces no hay ningún misterio, pero a veces con los eventos, ¿no? ¿Nada? Bien, ok.
Okay.
Sí, perdón.
Okay, David Pente, ¿cómo se dice su nombre? Rosalinda.
Rosalinda.
Tiene confianza con
su esposo.
No. The main character, what's her name again?
Okay. Sira.
¿Por qué de repente ella tiene confianza con Sira para hablar sobre espiando?
Al fin.
Mm-hmm.
Al final. Bueno, es buena pregunta. Am,
Can you repeat the question, please?
sí, ¿por qué tenía Rosalinda de manera muy de repente? Cuando se unieron en el restaurante en Marruecos, Rosalinda había salido con Begbieter, con Juan Luis, había salido a España y regresó. Y entonces dijeron, un año más tarde, 1 year later, ¿sí? Y entonces, después de vivir en España con Juan Luis, porque Juan Luis en eso entonces tenía un nuevo empleo como Ministerio de Asuntos Extranjeros, a Foreign Minister position, ¿ok? Y Juan Luis y Rosalinda vivían en España, entonces ella, Rosalinda, regresó a Marruecos.
No, she sent a telegram.
Sí, y regresó. Y las dos mujeres se reunieron en un restaurante para hablar. Y muy de repente, Rosalinda le dijo a Sira, necesito algo. Sí, las dos estaban fumando, ¿no? Estaban fumando. Y muy de repente ella le dijo, bueno, necesito a personas que puedan encargarse, encargarse de espionaje. Le pide de manera muy abrupta, ¿no? Muy abrupta. Opino que el propósito de Rosalinda siempre había sido tener influencia con Juan Luis, tener influencia para que España no se entrara en la guerra, la Segunda Guerra Mundial, porque ella era inglesa, claro, y entonces su propósito, su meta, her goal, su meta, verdaderamente estaba enamorada de Juan Luis, pero su meta era ayudar a su patria de Inglaterra. Y entonces, después de ese evento de robar los documentos de su esposo y el pasaporte de su esposo, de los alemanes, ¿recuerdas? Ok, entonces Sira le había pedido a Marcus que él le robara los documentos de Peter, el pasaporte de Peter, el horrible esposo. Y porque Sira pudo lograr eso, because she managed to pull that off. Ella no robó los documentos, pero sabía, ¿quién puede ayudar? Y era Marcos. Entonces, creo que Rosalinda estaba pensando durante ese año, y porque ellas eran muy amigas, muy buenas amigas, Rosalinda quería reclutar. She wanted to recruit.
Es muy interesante porque en el curso del año they went from helping each other to Rosalinda saying, hey, can you spy for us?
Yeah.
And so she actually, instead of just doing girls having fun and helping each other, now it's something of patriotism and keeping Spain out.
Sí.
But just 1 year, and suddenly Rosalinda thought, I can approach her with this.
Porque se habían comunicado la una con la otra durante ese año también, ¿sí? Por sus
Gran
cartas. Sí, sí, sí. Y las dos se tenían confianza. They had a trust in each other. Bueno, y recuerda, Miguel, que es una obra de ficción. Es obra de ficción. Ok, entonces, Rosalinda Paz sí era una persona de verdad y era realmente una amante de Juan Luis Begbieter. Sí, era amante, sí. Y siempre se sospechaba que Rosalinda era espía, siempre. Y vivía, después de todo, vivía en Portugal. En Portugal todos estaban espiando uno al otro. Everybody was spying in Portugal. Y al fin de la vida, ella se estableció en Portugal, al fin, muy después, mucho más tarde. Pero ella, ok, entonces, después de la guerra civil, había tanta destrucción en todo el país de España. Y muchos en España tenían miedo de empezar en otra guerra en Europa. Y porque los alemanes habían ayudado tanto a Franco. Franco tenía deuda con Hitler y Mussolini también. Porque Italia y Alemania habían enviado tropas, aviones, bombas, municiones, armas. Y el miedo en España era que mucha gente no quería estar en el medio de otra guerra, porque el país había tanta destrucción por todas partes del país después de la guerra. The country was so weakened, and the fear was that Franco was so indebted to the Axis powers. There was a great deal of pressure on him to come into the Second World War. Hitler in particular was like, I coughed up a lot for you, dude, and when am I getting some help? Where am I getting mine?
And it was actually the Germans who helped to bomb Guernica in the Basque region, yeah?
Eso sí, yeah. Guernica was the very first like big major population bombing. So Guernica is a very small town actually in País Vasco, Basque Country. And Basque Country was like a big hotbed of resistance to Franco.
Y porque la destrucción de la guerra, la madre de Sira le dice, sí,
debes ayudar.
Se pone espiando.
Sí. Yeah, the populace of Spain in general had no more fight in their gut to go help Germany. But the fear was that Franco was going to cave. And Franco did a really delicate dance between saying, yeah, I'll do something for you guys later. And then he just never really came through. There were always some whisperings that some Jews managed to trickle through the border from France and that he kind of would look the other way. Franco would look the other way. Don't stay too long. Please come through Spain and then head to Portugal. Don't stay here too long. But
So Franco could have been worse.
he could have been worse. He was not the nicest guy. He had his bad points. He also, I think, kind of in his own interests, I don't want to give him too much credit, in interest of his own self-preservation of his own regime. At some point, your populace has to be with you if you're going to take them into another war, and your own cities are kind of half rubble. And if your populace is not behind you, this is not going to go well. So I think that was his absolute bottom line. Franco's. I mean, in spite of the fact that he had received this help and he owed them.
He was a practical dictator.
He was a practical, absolutely. He was a practical dictator. He knew, you know.
So was it the Red Army that was trying to overthrow him?
Well, that's a complicated story. Okay. Brevemente, briefly. Let's condense this down to maybe a 5-minute thing. Leading up to the Spanish Civil War, there was the right and the left. And, you know, you have these people doing the food fight at the table at Candelarias. That was not really quite so far-fetched. That kind of stuff really did happen. The right and the left were, the right was very much more united. The right was composed of mainly the very conservative, the quite religious factions of the country. So the South was much more religiously oriented than the North. Much more conservative in terms of more big landholders in the South. The north of the country was more industrialized. The left was, for them, fatally for their goals, a very divided group. There was everything from just liberals to socialists to communists. And a lot of them didn't like each other. So for them to get together and fight together was a chore and never went super smooth. And everybody got labeled as rojo. You know, the old ladies at the table with Candelaria, everybody was a rojo. Everybody was a red. But the truth in real life was very much more a modeled kind of thing. You know, it was a blend of different kinds of people. And of course, the Lincoln Brigade was composed of some people from the United States and Canada who came to fight on behalf of the left. And the war itself was just one of the nastiest wars you can possibly imagine, because literally families were torn apart within families. There were a lot of people who were very left or very right politically. And there would be leftist bands of fighters who would come into a small town, line up all the priests and nuns and shoot them all down against the wall, literally. And then the right would come in and retake stuff and line up all the liberals and shoot them down, literally. And people who very much had brother against brother situations. So it was the nastiest possible kind of civil war you could imagine. With really, once the Franco's people came in, if you were a war orphan and your family was part of the left, you were often given to a family that was a nice conservative family. And you know, these people are just finding out now that their family is not their real family, going back maybe 1 or 2 generations. And so the hard feelings have been hard and bad and really nasty, but it's yeah, it was not an easy war. But it was so ripped apart, and infrastructure wise, had been so much bombing that people just said, we cannot, We don't like it that Franco's here, but let's just be done with this. And there were still some parts in the north that fought for quite a while, quite a few years after. You know, they have that big announcement that El Primero de Abril, April 1st, was it 39? Yeah, April 1st of 39 was when Franco declared that he had cleaned up all the last bit. And he had cleaned up most of them, except for some people who fled to the mountains in the north who kind of managed to evade detection for a while. But, you know, largely the country was all subdued by that time, April 1st, 1939. And then by that time, people were kind of like, enough already. But that willingness to go into another war was not strong. So having this person who is a lover of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, who is an Anglophile, you know, immediately Juan Luis becomes somewhat suspect for the company he is keeping. But there are people who are actively in Madrid trying to make sure that Franco does not come into the Axis side. And that is a real hotbed of people trying to pull ministers this way and the other in the government. For there are Germans doing that, there are Brits doing that. Mainly it's a German and Brit thing, not the French so much.
Both trying to influence Spain to enter the war on either of their sides.
Right. They want, and actually the Brits are very, very happy. The Allied powers are very happy with just don't come in on anybody's side. Just stay neutral. We're good with that. You know, not even necessarily looking for join us with the Allies, just don't join the Axis. So, yeah, it was, and he did keep them out, and yeah, so was that a good thing? Yeah, but it was complicated.
I saw a movie about, oh God, Man in the Sea. What's his name? Cuba guy. Oh.
Castro.
No, he's a writer. I'm sorry. He wrote Man in the Sea. We lived in.
Oh, Hemingway. Hemingway.
I just got it. And I mean, it looked like in that movie, it was based on, I don't know, his wives and all this, but he spent a lot of time in Spain, and it looked like.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And he played the middle. He was interesting in that.
He wrote For Whom the Bell Tolls, goes through that, and it's very much the story told from the side of people fighting with the Republicans. So it was called formerly the Republicans, which was the liberal side, versus the nationalists, who were Franco's. It was a fascist party. I mean, that was just straight out a fascist party. And the symbolism was all Falangist fascist symbolism. And it's very, very interesting because my first time was only 2 years after the old man died, and the monuments were still up to Franco everywhere. And, you know, as the country swung back and forth, the country finally was like, you know, they're just starting to take down a lot of this stuff. Well, not just starting. It's been going on for quite some time. But now when you go into the big museums, it's very much a revisionist sort of thing with history, where they're saying, yeah, this guy was really just not good for us. And it was a terrible time. But if you looked at all the museums when I first went over, it was very much pro-Franco, versus now it's very much anti-Franco. Not to say there are not pro-Franco people in Spain. There still are some. And some of them still like that little salute thing too. But it's really getting swept out. I mean, the push is very strong. But, you know, Spain is a country of many, many opposites. They have the most devout to the most irreverent, to the left and the right, and everything in between. But, you know, the socialism thing isn't such a dirty word in Spain as it can be here in America. So, and there are a lot more parties there, a lot more political parties than we have here. So people on various sides of the left and various sides of the right. So, okay. Bien. Lo que quiero decirles es un poco que me gustaría hablar un poquito de confiar. La confianza, this topic of confidence, trust. Se dice en español confiar en alguien, to trust in somebody. They use en with confiar. Confiar en, to have trust in somebody. O tener confianza, sí, o fiarse de. Fiarse de, pero confiar en. Fiarse de also means to trust. Tenemos la historia de realmente de dos familias y quiero hablar un poquito de las diferencias en el grado, the degree, el grado de confianza. Por ejemplo, tenemos el contraste de la mamá de Sira regresando desde Madrid a Marruecos con su hija. Su mamá al principio, at first, cuando llegó a Marruecos, no tenía confianza en nada. ¿Cómo era la mamá al llegar a Marruecos?
Y aprensivo.
Sí, en su apariencia, en cómo se veía, en how she looked, en cómo se veía, había envejecido. She had really aged.
Sí, ella tenía PTSD.
Yeah.
Eso es, sí, exactamente.
Yeah.
La mamá sufría de estrés postraumático. Postraumático. Estrés postraumático, que sería normal en su situación, ¿no? Porque había vivido durante la guerra. ¿Habló mucho de la guerra con su hija?
No, nada.
Y creo que quizás algunos de ustedes saben más de eso, pero yo creo que es bastante común, bien común, bastante común entre la gente que sufre de este estrés, de que al principio no quieren hablar mucho de sus experiencias. No están cómodos de hablar de eso. Y así era con la mamá de Sira. Entonces, ella no confiaba en nadie. ¿Sí?
Ella tenía mucho miedo de todo.
Mucho miedo de todo. Miedo de los carros. Miedo del ruido de un carro.
Sí.
De la pipa de exhausto, ¿no? Tenía miedo de los ruidos del carro en la calle. Y no podía reaccionar de manera normal con su hija cuando llegó, ¿verdad? No tenía confianza o no confiaba en nadie. Entonces sí, teníamos esa reunión entre madre e hija. Y entonces teníamos el contraste de la reunión entre Rosalinda y su esposo.
Ah,
¡Ah! ¡Qué hombre!
ah,
Ese hombre era una pesadilla, ¿no?
Sí.
Una pesadilla. Y ¡ay! ¡Qué marido! Bueno, entonces él tenía sus propios problemas. Claro. Confiaba Peter en su esposa.
Yeah, yeah.
No.
No,
Pues
She had like 9 lives. He was always sure she'd come out on top.
y él siempre se hablaba o hablaba de ella. Tú eres como una gata, Rosalinda.
Yeah.
Siempre caes con las patas aquí, ¿sí?
Yeah.
Eres como una
yo-
gata. Y él quería quedarse al principio, quería quedarse con su familia, con el niño y con Rosalinda. Y claro que Rosalinda no quería nada, no quería tener nada, no.
En la manera de Pedro, él tenía un poco de respeto para Rosalinda, porque
Poco
no,
respeto.
no.
Sí, ¿crees que
de una
sí?
manera, porque él le dijo que
Qué linda casa.
siempre sé que tú tienes buenas amigas, pero no sé que son tan poderosos.
Sí. Peter reconoce el poder de su mujer en reconocer quienes tenían poder.
Yeah.
Asociarse con los que tienen poder, con los que tenían dinero. Sí, veo. Peter le dijo, sí, veo que, claro, tienes una casa muy linda, una casa como palacio. Claro que tú sabes lograr, you know how to achieve, you know how to get something. Sabes lograr una casa estupenda.
Uh-huh.
Sabes asociarse con la gente de Tetuán que tienen mucho poder. Sí, en ese respecto, sí, tiene mucho respeto, que ella sabe quién es quién.
With a person like that, that's all they do respect. They respect your ability to get power or to associate with power.
Sí. Peter la respeta por saber qué tiene que hacer. Por
Pero
su habilidad de sobrevivir y vivir bien. Perdón. Perdón, Janet.
Pero otro lado, él era un hombre muy violento.
Violento. Siempre tiene que tener el control de la situación, control de su esposa, control de su familia muy pequeña. Y claro, entonces Marcos sí ayudó muchísimo en esa situación, en obtener, en robar los papeles. Bueno, ¿cuál era el secreto de Peter? Porque tenía secreto. Bebía demasiado, es obvio, sí, porque salió del bar totalmente borracho, bien pedo.
Gambling.
Y ¿qué supimos? What did we find out? ¿Qué supimos que era como un secreto de Peter?
Peter ha tenido una duda con los alemanes.
Deudas.
Deuda.
Tenía deudas. Sí. Le gustaba jugar. He liked to bet. Sí. Sí. Que no es gran sorpresa, pero tenía deudas y nos dijeron que él debió una fortuna. He owed a fortune. No decían cuánto. They weren't telling us how much. No nos decían cuánto debió, pero una fortuna. Entonces, por eso él tenía, por causa de las deudas, because of those debts, el oficial alemán tenía los documentos y el pasaporte. Y el pasaporte, ¿cómo consigo el pasaporte? Quizás perdió el pasaporte en un juego de póker.
Es un libro.
Sí, no sé, pero, ok.
I have to do this in English.
Okay.
I've seen too many Sundance festivals. So, I mean, those are weird things. But I wondered by the end, if that jerky persona he had wasn't an act to protect her. You know, like if I piss her off so much, or if she'll do this, or she'll be safe. I wondered, especially when you watched his face at the end. I don't know. I just wondered, you know, maybe.
Pero estaba. Entiendo lo que dices, pero también estaba muy contento de salir sin ellos.
Yeah.
He was too much of a natural jerk to be acting.
Maybe, I don't know. Yeah. He's
Sí.
protecting his wife and kid, maybe. I don't know. Just it was a possibility.
And you have to remember too, and this one I'm saying for you, Pat, because it's kind of a complicated thing. You know, there were even certain pockets, because this is just before the war broke out. I mean, they know it's coming. Anybody who is anybody knows it's going to happen. So, you know, April 1st, you're looking at just about 5 or 6 months till the war officially starts, okay? But there were pockets within some very upper echelons of British society who were still kind of like, well, kind of appeasement oriented.
Yeah.
You know, there was that whole deal brokered with the Brits over kind of, you know, letting Hitler have his way in taking over Austria and Czechoslovakia and all of that. And let's just appease him. You know, it was the appeasement thing.
Yeah.
And so there were, you know, even up to the guy who left the kingship, you know, which Edward? I've got all the Edwards here.
Yeah.
Edward VIII. You know, there were rumors for ages and ages afterwards, up until after he is long dead, that he was just too cozy with the Germans. And you know, that was why he was sent off to the Caribbean, to what was it, Bermuda?
Yeah.
He was sent to Bermuda. He was shipped off to Bermuda. They just thought, Churchill really felt he was just too cozy with the Germans.
Yeah.
And that he'd be giving away secrets. So, you know, you got to imagine if your former king, who resigned over, you know, the twice divorced woman, then, oh, you know, all that wonderful mess. If they're suspicious of him, and he's got friends, of course, who are in the aristocracy, you got to imagine there are, leading up to the war, certain pockets of people who were like, well, so they're Germans, you know, and give a little, take a
They
little.
would never mess with them anyway.
Yeah, so, you know, we don't really know what camp Peter's in.
Right. Yeah.
We don't really know. He was perfectly happy to be living in India for a long time without his family.
Mm-hmm.
We have no idea how abusive he was. We know he drinks like a fish. We know he
Well,
has
he did
debts.
when he had that debt. Yeah. Yeah. I guess
We gotta hope she's got her own money. We've got to hope she's got her own money tucked away somewhere.
His psychology is consistent though, because usually someone that is abusive and lording power over their spouse is someone that's unable to control themselves or have any power in their life.
Yeah.
So he owes money, he can't stop drinking, he can't stop gambling, so he tries to own his wife instead.
It is just consistent with a very kind of sick guy. Yeah. So, but you know, you have two homecomings, let us say, right, in Marruecos. And the one is sort of joyful but tentative, and she's very protective. And the other one is, well, baby, here I am. She's like, God, get away, you know, please go away. But, you know, she's very much trying to move things behind the scenes. Rosalinda, you know, she's very much trying. And yeah, that does come up very, very suddenly, doesn't it, at the end? Hi, how are you? Great. How are you? Great. Want to do some spying? You know, I noticed, but you know, she kind of brings it up as, you know, I noticed you handled things so well with all of these things of getting your mother in. Of course, she introduced him or introduced Sira to Peter in the first place, and he helped manipulate that whole thing to get that moving and get mom out of Spain. But, you know, even with all of that, wow, she managed to use all these, you know, she knows she gets through the wives. Sira gets through this information through knowing the wives. It's her foot in the door. And it's like, we got all these German wives over here because she moves through these social circles. And, you know, how do you get through to these people? Well, through their family, you try to do it in an unwitting way. And she will do this in a very, very clever way. But you'll find that out in the next episode, how they kind of set this up. And actually, I, as someone who sews, when they devise how they're going to pass information, I say to myself, you could do that. It is not at all far-fetched. But there was a lot of spying both in Portugal and in Spain at that time because of how fluid the situation was and the fact that both sides fighting against each other were all in that social milieu right before the war and during the war, and each side trying to manipulate the other to their end. So that part is all quite true. Okay.
Una pregunta.
Sí, dime.
¿Cuál fue el significado de sacar la piedra negra, Rosalinda, de la bolsa?
Cuando Juan Luis y Rosalinda se conocieron, la primera vez, hace años, la primera vez, Rosalinda nos dijo que almorzaron los dos, al conocerse, almorzaron. Y Juan Luis había sacado una piedra negra y una piedra blanca. Y si sacase la piedra blanca, vamos a quedarnos juntos. Vamos a ser pareja. Vamos a hacernos pareja. We're going to become a couple. If you pick, so he had taken them out from behind his back.
And he would not be a minister. He would just like throw that away.
So he pulled this out the second time. The first time it was a symbol of, are we going to stay together? Is this lunch where we clicked? And it's all, hey baby, is that going to become something? You pick the white stone. It's kind of like well, no, okay. You know, you pick the blue pill, you guys know the movie, the blue pill or the red pill, but yeah, it's the choice. You know, pick the white one, we become a couple. So now it becomes, you know, do we stay or do we go back to Spain? And she, according to the movie at least, we don't really know in real life if she really wanted to stay or take off or not. But yeah, muy dramático.
Roy,
Oh, otra vez.
Oh, I said it's interesting. It's good. I like it. Me gusta. Oh, yay.
Te gusta, sí.
I was confused because I thought when she drew the white rock, that meant that they would stay in Morocco, and she didn't tell him about that. I don't know.
Well, yeah, see, that's the thing. And
He
see,
drew it after he left the room. She's like, "No, we'll go to- I'm gonna
después
go
de que
with you to help
salió
stand through
Juan
this."
Luis,
Then she
ella,
drew it afterwards.
eso es, sí, exactamente, exactamente. Y creo que ella sabía que tenía que regresar a España para trabajar, para ayudar a dar influencia, a ganar influencia aparte de los ingleses con los españoles. Ella sabía, en su corazón sabía que tenía que salir y regresar a España para lograr su meta, to get to her goal, which was to help her own country. And she's very blatant about saying, I need to help my country. I love Juan Luis, but I need to help my country, and we need to keep Spain out of the war. Ay, qué sorpresa. Okay. But, you know, she does it in a very clever way. And of course, the spycraft thing was you want to go under the radar, literally, you know, or figuratively. Figuratively, you want to be under the radar. You want to operate so that everybody thinks you're just Joe Schmo. You're just another person in the crowd. Bien. Eso es. Ok. Hay más preguntas, observaciones, opiniones.
¿Dónde es su esposa? I mean, they're going to live in Mexico or in Madrid together, but you know, what happened to his wife?
Oh, de Juan Luis.
Yeah.
No sé. Busqué información sobre la familia de Juan Luis y no pude encontrar nada de su esposa.
Oh, okay. Wait a minute.
Me imagino que sí estaba, pero era bastante común en aquel entonces tener otra familia o un amante, y estaban bastante abiertos de tener relaciones con otra gente.
Okay.
Es el machismo. It's that machismo thing. It was not really always swept under the rug, you know.
Okay. And
It's
then
My British
Sabemos-
friend comments on this to this day. I have a British friend who has a little summer home in Italy. How lovely. And he always comments, because it's a small town. It's a rural place. Sting has an estate next to him. And he said, you know, Thursday is mistress night at the restaurant in Italy. It's a very Mediterranean thing. Thursday night, you go out to eat, they all come in with their mistresses. I said, oh, come on. He said, yes, this is what happens. I said, that's quite a generalization. But
the wives come out with their guns too.
it's yeah. So, you know, what I can tell you is that there is a certain thing in Latin culture with, you know, the other woman, and sometimes it is looked down upon if it's a very conservative kind of environment, and sometimes it's an oh well. So apparently it was an oh well in this situation. Ok, a ver, bueno, entonces vamos a continuar. Vamos a saber cómo ella empieza su carrera en el espionaje. Y por qué ella quiere, bueno, sabemos por qué quiere ayudar, ¿sí? La opinión de Dolores, de la mamá, cuenta con ella. It counts with her. Sí. Y la opinión de Dolores es que España no debe entrar en la guerra. No debe entrar en otra guerra, que la gente no puede soportar. Soportar no es... soportar es put up with. Soportar es tolerar. tolerar, the people cannot tolerate anymore. They cannot take anymore. La gente está harta con la guerra, con la destrucción, con la falta de comida. When Spain came out of that war, and really for many, many years, well into the 50s, it was probably one of the poorest countries in Europe. Well, Portugal was not in fabulous shape either, but Spain emerged from that war as one of the poorest countries. And there were an awful lot of situations of people literally building back their lives. So it took a very, very long time to build back. It wasn't really till the 60s, so things started to look kind of normal. And then we had to wait until about 75 for the old man to kick off, because he hung on a long time. Ok. Bien. Vale. ¿Hay más preguntas o no?
No.
Ok. Bueno, vamos a ver. Hay un artículo, tenemos poco tiempo, pero un poco tiempo. Esta cosa de la influencia del este, the influence of the East, la influencia árabe, la influencia de la cultura árabe y del este en España es una influencia muy, muy fuerte. Y tenemos un artículo que encontró Esteban. Esteban encontró este artículo que es muy interesante. Hammam. ¿Qué es un hammam? Es un baño. Es un baño público. Un hammam es un término árabe. Hammam medieval, descubierto en bar de tapas de Sevilla. So this shows you how far back some of these things go. An ancient bathhouse was found that goes way back to medieval times. And medieval for them means that they were essentially Arabic bathhouse setup. This is what it was. And in the process of renovating a tapas bar of all places down in Sevilla, they started to find this wasn't always a tapas bar. This wasn't even always a restaurant. This used to be a public bath. How fun. It's got architecture that goes back centuries and centuries. Y voy a enviarles el enlace a este artículo. Arqueólogo Álvaro Jiménez, decorativamente hablando, decoratively speaking, estos baños tienen la mayor cantidad de decoración conservada de todos los baños conocidos en la península ibérica. This is the most detailed Arabic architecture that they've found well preserved in a very long time. Este importante descubrimiento nos da una idea de cómo pudieron haber sido otros baños durante la época almohade. Almohade refiere a la época de los árabes, una época de los árabes en España. En el siglo, ¿en qué siglo? En el siglo XII, el siglo XIII, in the 1200s, probably. This is like that old, okay? Especialmente en Sevilla. Y la influencia, claro, la influencia árabe es tan fuerte, mucho más fuerte en el sur del país, donde está, claro, Sevilla. Ok, una casa de baños islámica que data del siglo XII, so from the 1100s, that old, ha sido descubierta durante las obras de renovación en un bar de tapas en la ciudad española de Sevilla. And by the way, in the 12th century, that part of Spain was known for having a very clean sewer system. while people in the rest of Europe were throwing their pee and poop out of their windows. Very literally. That was sanitation in Europe in 1100. If you see some of those old movies about, the swashbuckler times, people throwing their waste out of the windows, that literally was happening. So for there to be this wonderful, well-developed sewer system so people didn't get terrible things like cholera, was a big deal in the public bathhousing. Los propietarios de Cervecería Giralda, and I'll show you Giralda. Esta torre aquí, la torre en la foto aquí, se llama La Giralda. This is the name of this tower. This tower is completely a piece of arte árabe. This is Arabic architecture, totally. It is attached to something that is not arte árabe. What it is attached to is what had been destroyed and rebuilt on. This whole structure es la catedral. Este edificio es la catedral de Sevilla. Es una catedral medieval. Es una catedral gótica. It is a Gothic cathedral. It is quite large inside. You get that big gas feeling of Gothic, the great big tall, big arches and things, because they destroyed what the mosque that had been attached to it and built this big thing. They say that Columbus is buried in that building, by the way, but we're not really sure. No estamos muy seguros. We're not that sure. But they left this tower because they needed a bell tower. So what had begun as a minaret to call people to prayer when the Musulmanes owned it, they just kept as a bell tower. And nowadays, I don't know if you can still go up. When I was there, you could still go up into the bell tower. Okay. Los propietarios del bar aprovecharon la poca afluencia del año pasado debido a la pandemia del coronavirus para hacer cambios en el bar. Decidieron renovar el bar porque mucha gente no vinieron. Lots of people didn't come. Okay, habían cerrado todo in lockdown y aprovecharon. They took advantage of that time, ¿sí? Para hacer cambios en el bar que se inauguró cerca de la catedral de la ciudad en 1923 y lleva el nombre de su campanario. It carries the name of its campanario, is the bell tower. That's that Giralda that I showed you, the tower. Que alguna vez fue el minarete. It was the minaret de la gran mezquita de la ciudad. Hacía mucho tiempo que abundaban los rumores. So for a long time, these rumors abounded. There were abundant rumors. Abundaban los rumores de que el sitio había sido un hammam que databa del periodo de la ciudad bajo el dominio almohade entre 1147 y 1238. Esos rumores se habían atribuido a la apariencia del edificio, que estaba fuertemente influenciado por el estilo de renacimiento islámico popular en la década de 1920 y muy admirado por Vicente Taver. ¿Quién era? Quien fundó el bar, el dueño original del bar. Vicente Traver, el dueño original en 1920 del bar. Y el hotel que lo acompañaba en el mismo edificio. Ok, Antonio Castro, uno de los dueños actuales, one of the current owners, uno de los dueños actuales del bar dijo al diario The Guardian, Guardian es el periódico inglés, se habló de que había baños aquí. It was said that there had been baths here, pero no todos los historiadores estaban convencidos. Y algunos pensaron que todo fue mucho más tarde. And lots thought it was really much later. Pero Castro y sus socios, socios son sus amigos en el negocio. Socios are like your business partners. Okay. Decidieron invitar al arqueólogo local Álvaro Jiménez a inspeccionar el sitio durante la renovación. Y esto ayudó a llevar al descubrimiento de sus verdaderos orígenes cuando un yeso astilado se desprendió del techo. So, yeso is plaster. And when they were pulling down the old plaster out of the ceiling, el techo, para revelar un tragaluz en el estilo de una estrella de 8 puntas. When you see an 8-pointed star in the architecture, they automatically know they've got something going back to the Norse. That is one of the hallmarks of the architectural structure that would be typical. 8-pointed stars, also horseshoe-shaped casings for windows. Horseshoe-shaped is another hallmark of that. Okay. I am going to leave the rest of that for you to read.
Yes, tragaluces.
Tragaluces, tragar es to swallow. Tengo que buscar tragaluces. Me parece que es algo muy definido a la arquitectura. That's an architectural term. Tragar is to swallow lights. Tragaluz, skylight.
Oh, okay.
Skylight, tragaluces. Sería lógico tener tragaluces en un baño. In a bathhouse, it would be logical to have skylights to get some natural light in.
Yep.
Bring in the light, keep the heat going with the baths. Heat of the sun in the southern part of the country. Yeah, sería bastante lógico. Okay. Tragaluz. Okay. Les voy a enviar el enlace para el artículo, también los 2 enlaces para los 2 episodios más allá en la historia de la película. ¿Está bien?
Está
Está bien.
Está bien, magnífico. Ok, bueno, entonces nos vemos la semana que viene. Ando en busca de vacunas la semana que viene. Ando en busca. I'm going out in search. Oh, tienes una vaca. ¿Qué? Oh, es una tarjeta. Es tu cumpleaños. Es tu cumpleaños, Roy.
Muy bueno.
Muy bueno.
Muy bueno. Me encanta. ¿Recibiste esa tarjeta o es de tu esposa? ¿Es tu tarjeta?
He's muted.
Oh, you're muted, Roy.
Sí, es mi tarjeta. De cumpleaños.
Y feliz cumpleaños. El mío llega bastante pronto, muy pronto. Bueno, felicidades, felicidades.
Gracias.
Bueno, espero que tengan buena semana y buen fin de semana, claro. Y eso es, ¿ok? Entonces, sí, nos vemos más tarde.
Vemos.
Ok,
Bueno.
adiós.
Adiós.